to run both the user search and the group search. So there's two different ways you can do this, and of course this code will work on both the Apache DS and the Microsoft server. We'll show you that by just switching these two configs, and it'll still work. So let's run it and take a look. Okay, so we ran it against our Apache or our Microsoft one first. That's where we have the least amount of users. So let's take a look at our output. So paging with events, we're getting the 3 records at a time. Our page size is 3, as you can see here. So we only have 3 users in our Microsoft Atom directory server. And in here we have 4 groups though. So we get the first page of 3 groups, and then we get one page with just 1 group in it because that's the last one. And then you see now we're going to run it using our Spring Bean, and we get the same results. We still get the first 3 in the first page, and then we're done. And then we get find all groups, and then we get the first 3 and then the last one in the second page. So that's how it's working when we point it to Microsoft. So now let's just demonstrate what happens when we switch it. Okay, so we'll switch it over now to our Apache one where we have a few more users. Okay, and so here you see paging with events. We get the first 3 records, we get the next 3 records, we get the next 3 records, we get the last 2, and then we start paging our groups. We do a find on all groups, we get the first 3, we get the last 2, then we rerun the whole thing again. See the logging here, we're saying paging with the Spring Bean. So now we get the same amount. We get the first 3, the next 3, the next 3, the last 2. Then you see we switch and find all the groups, and again we get the same results, the first 3 and the last 2. So that's using Spring to do the paging, and doing it 2 different ways, with the one with the Spring Bean and one by using basically an interface method that we're calling back. So if we go, let's take another look at that just to go over what's going on here again. So you see, of course we're not going to call it if we don't have it. So when you set this up, you would have had to set it up with that interface, and how we do it here is just we're using ourselves. We're using our own instance to let us know, and then of course we've used the paging event, so we've defined the paging event, so that's what's happening. It's calling back into the paging event. Okay, and it's doing that for both of these cases. Now when we actually use the Spring way of doing it, you see here we're keeping track of the cookie ourselves. We're passing it in the first time as null, and then every time we come through, it's sending us back a cookie in our page result value. This is a Spring page result, and that page result, the PR, is going to have a cookie and the result set. So after we come through the first time, it's going to give us a cookie, and we keep iterating through it until the cookie is null. And every time we get a list of results, we're going to call that same paging event, but this time we're calling it ourselves rather than having it called back for us. So so that demonstrates the 2 different ways we're doing this. Let's see what else. Okay, so I wanted to go over the libraries here. So all the libraries we're using, as you can tell, I'm using NetBeans for this project, and we're using 691 of NetBeans. It just so happens that NetBeans comes with Spring, so we're using the built-in Spring framework from NetBeans to get all of the core imports here. Well, actually, we would see them in our actual code here. So our Spring core stuff would be coming from here mostly, and our LDAP stuff will be coming from here and here. I think we're probably using more of the base Spring stuff if we look in here. Right, so we're using some Spring stuff here, and we would need to have both of these. There's some things in here that you will need for the LDAPper to work. So we got these 2 that I downloaded individually and set up my own library in NetBeans for. So you see they're the 131 release and 131 core Tiger release, and this is what comes with NetBeans here. And here I just have some of the Commons collections, the Apache Commons. I have a bunch of them in this particular library set, but I think in this case all we really need is Commons Lang. And I also have the Log4j library set up. So those are things you're going to have to get one way or the other. If you're already using this version of NetBeans, you already have some of these. And Log4j is easy enough to get. Apache Commons is easy enough to get. And the LDAP core is easy enough to get from Spring. If I tried to supply those, the downloads would just get too big. So anyway, that's how we did paging using Spring and LDAP, and how we now have Log4j plugged into this, and we went over what the new attribute mapper looks like, and how we're getting lists of the attribute mapper as opposed to just lists of a string and getting the attributes one at a time. So that should pretty much do it for that. Let's look at the config again here. So you see we still have the two separate configs, and we have the two separate values that we're using for our group search and user search. The thing is they're configured essentially the same. The only difference are the values that we use for group searching and user searching in the two different servers. So I think I went over in the last video why these are what they are, and these multi-valued attributes are for each one, and how they differ. And here's how we're setting up our pager using a Spring Bean, again with the two separate searching methods. So one other thing I wanted to mention was when I first started trying the paging, it didn't work until I set the pooled option on here in the context source. Now I also found out that if you don't want to use pooled options in your context source, then I had to define this mutable pooling context source here. So if you don't want to use the pooling options in the context, then you can define these two beans here, and in the paging code you would in the paging test code you would switch to those. So wherever you're using an LDAP context, you would use the mutable one instead, and the paging will still work, and you won't have to use that pooled option if you don't want to. Okay, so let's see, 15 minutes, just slightly over the YouTube limit. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. Good. Bye.